they smiled at the wedding. Every single one of them. The kind of smiles that look warm in photographs. The kind that convince you, fool you, into believing you are safe, loved, and surrounded by people who want the best for you. If you look at my wedding album today, you'll see a glowing bride, a proud groom, and rows of beaming faces behind us. You won't see the warning signs. You won't hear the silence that would later scream. You won't feel the slow poison that would turn my marriage into a nightmare. But I did, and I live with it every day. My name is Jane. I was 34 when I walked down the aisle believing I was stepping into forever. I didn't know I was stepping into a carefully hidden storm. I met Daniel on an ordinary afternoon, one of those days that feels unimportant until it becomes the beginning of everything. We bumped into each other at a small bookstore cafe in Ohio. I spilled coffee on his jacket. I apologized too many times. He laughed, waved it off, and said something simple that stuck with me. Accidents are just life asking us to pause. Daniel was gentle in a way that felt rare. He listened. He remembered small things, how I liked my tea, the book I'd read as a child when my parents fought, the way I hated loud arguments. With him, life felt quiet, stable. After years of emotional chaos, quiet felt like love. When Daniel proposed, it wasn't dramatic. No crowd. No ring hidden in dessert. Just the two of us sitting on the porch of his childhood home, fireflies blinking in the dark. He held my hands and said, "I want to build a life where you never feel alone again." I said yes without hesitation. I should have hesitated. The wedding was beautiful, soft music, white flowers, summer sunlight filtering through the church windows. Daniel's family filled the front rows. His mother, Margaret, smiled tightly, her lips pressed together like she was holding something back. Sisters whispered to each other, glancing at me, then away. His aunt hugged me a second too long and said, "Welcome to the family," in a tone that felt more like a warning than a blessing. I ignored it all, because love has a way of blinding you, especially when you want to believe. After the honeymoon, reality arrived quietly. We moved into a small house near Daniel's parents. "Just temporary," he said. "They're getting older. It'll be easier to help them." I agreed. I wanted to be a good wife. A supportive partner. At first, it was little things. Margaret would show up unannounced, letting herself in with the spare key Daniel insisted she keep. She rearranged my kitchen drawers, commented on how I folded laundry. Once, she took my cooking pot off the stove and said, "That's not how Daniel likes his soup." I laughed it off. "She means well," Daniel said. "She's just used to doing things her way." Then came the comments. "You don't wake up early enough. You're too sensitive. You don't dress like a married woman. Daniel used to be so happy before." Each sentence was delivered with a smile. Each one landed like a small cut. When I tried to talk to Daniel, he brushed it aside. "You're overthinking. That's just how they are. Don't let it get to you." So I stopped talking. I started swallowing my words, my discomfort, my growing fear that I didn't belong in my own home. The first real crack appeared 3 months into the marriage. We were hosting a family dinner. I spent the entire day cooking, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, a dessert Daniel said his family loved. As everyone sat down, Margaret tasted the food and frowned. "It's fine," she said loudly. "Not how I make it, but fine." Daniel laughed. Something inside me broke a little. Later that night, after everyone left, I cried in the bathroom, sitting on the cold floor so Daniel wouldn't hear. I told myself this was normal. Families adjust. Marriages take work. But what no one tells you is this. Sometimes the work isn't building love, it's surviving quiet cruelty. Weeks passed, then months. Daniel began changing. He started coming home late. His phone stayed face down. When I asked questions, he sighed like I was exhausting him. His family's words began slipping into his mouth. "You're always emotional. You need to be more understanding. My mom thinks you misunderstood. My mom thinks it was never we think. Never I feel, always my mom." I realized then that I wasn't married to just Daniel. I was married into a system, one that smiled in public and punished in private. The nightmare didn't arrive all at once. It crept in through jokes, silence, gaslighting, and the slow erosion of my confidence. One night during a family gathering, Daniel's sister leaned over and whispered, "You know, you're lucky Daniel married you. Not everyone would." I smiled back. Inside, I was shrinking. I began to doubt myself. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I was doing marriage wrong. I stopped calling my friends. I stopped sharing my feelings. I started apologizing for things I hadn't done. I was disappearing. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday evening. Daniel came home angry. I asked what was wrong. He snapped, "Why can't you just be normal like other wives?" The words felt rehearsed, borrowed from someone else's mouth. I asked him quietly, "Do you still love me?" He didn't answer. Silence is louder than shouting. That night, lying beside him, I stared at the ceiling and understood something terrifying. The people who smiled at my wedding weren't celebrating my happiness. They were welcoming me into control, and I had no idea how far they were willing to go. Because this was only the beginning. The moment you realize you are alone in a marriage, something inside you goes quiet forever. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet. That was the silence that settled into my life after that rainy Tuesday night. Daniel slept beside me, breathing evenly, while my mind raced with questions I was afraid to ask. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, replaying every conversation, every dismissive look, every smile that now felt like a lie. By morning, I had made a decision without even realizing it. I would try harder. That's what women like me do. We blame ourselves first. We adjust. We bend. We break quietly so no one else has to feel uncomfortable. I woke up early, made Daniel's favorite breakfast, and packed his lunch the way his mother used to because she had shown me, corrected me, and reminded me more than once. When he left for work, he kissed my forehead without really looking at me. "Thanks," he said, already distracted. I told myself it was progress. It was. The family dinners became more frequent. Sunday lunches turned into midweek drop-ins. Margaret stopped knocking altogether. She would walk into my house, glance around, and sigh as if disappointed by something she couldn't quite name. "You didn't dust the shelf," she said once, running her finger along the edge. "You forgot to iron Daniel's shirt. You should really keep the house more welcoming." Each comment was small, polite, almost reasonable. Together, they were suffocating. Daniel never defended me, not once. If I protested, he said I was starting fights. If I stayed quiet, he said I was being cold. There was no winning, only surviving. Then came the comparisons. Margaret talked endlessly about Daniel's ex-girlfriend, Lisa, how organized she was, how respectful, how she understood the family. I had never met Lisa, but she lived in my marriage like a ghost. "You know," Margaret said one afternoon while rearranging my pantry, "Lisa always asked before changing things." I nodded, even though my hands were shaking. Daniel didn't notice, or maybe he did and chose not to. My world slowly shrank to the walls of that house. Friends stopped calling after I canceled plans too many times. My parents sensed something was wrong, but I lied. I said marriage was an adjustment. I said I was happy. I was. The real nightmare began the day I overheard a conversation I was never meant to hear. Daniel's phone rang while he was in the shower. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't suspicious. I was just folding laundry when his mother's name lit up the screen. The call went to voicemail. Curiosity, or maybe intuition, made me listen. "Daniel," Margaret's voice said, sharp and controlled, "this situation cannot continue. She is changing you. The house is not the same. The family is not the same. You need to decide where your loyalty lies." My hands went numb. Changing him? The family not the same? I listened to that message 3 times, each word sinking deeper into my chest. When Daniel came out of the bathroom, I asked him about it. His face changed. Not guilt, not surprise. Annoyance. "You listened to my voicemail?" he asked. "I wasn't trying to spy," I said. What did she mean?" He sighed heavily like I had exhausted him again. "She's just worried. You don't really fit into how we do things." Fit. That word echoed for days. I didn't fit into my own marriage. After that, the tone shifted completely. The smiles disappeared. The politeness faded. Margaret stopped pretending. She criticized openly now, corrected me in front of others. Once during dinner she said, "Daniel needs structure. Some women don't understand that." Everyone laughed. I forced a smile while my heart cracked open. Daniel started spending more time at his parents' house. Sometimes he didn't come home until midnight. When I asked where he was, he said, "At least there I can relax." That sentence hurt more than anything else he'd ever said. I tried counseling. I suggested it gently, hopefully. He laughed. "There's nothing wrong with me," he said. "You're the one who's unhappy." So I went alone. The therapist listened quietly as I spoke for the first time in months. She asked one question that stayed with me. "Jane, when was the last time you felt safe?" I couldn't answer. Things escalated quickly after that. Margaret began involving herself in our finances. She questioned my spending, suggested Daniel manage the money until I learned responsibility. One evening, I discovered my name removed from the joint account. Daniel said it was temporary. I knew it was. I was losing control of my life piece by piece, my voice, my space, my independence, and all of it was happening with calm smiles and reasonable explanations. That's the most dangerous kind of abuse. The kind no one believes. The night everything truly changed came without warning. Daniel came home late again. I asked, calmly, carefully, if we could talk. I told him I felt pushed out, isolated, unloved. He looked at me and said, "Maybe this marriage was a mistake." Just like that. No tears, no discussion, a mistake. Something inside me snapped, not loudly, but cleanly, like a thread being cut. For the first time, I didn't cry. I just looked at him and realized the truth I had been avoiding. The people who smiled at my wedding didn't just want control. They wanted me gone, and Daniel was letting them decide. I slept on the couch that night, staring at the dark, feeling something new rise inside me, not fear, not sadness, but clarity. If this was a war, then it was no longer one-sided. There is a moment in every nightmare when fear changes its shape. At first, fear makes you quiet. It teaches you how to tiptoe, how to apologize before you speak, how to disappear without leaving a mess. But then, one night, fear stops whispering and starts staring straight back at you. That moment came for me on a Thursday night I will never forget. I was still sleeping on the couch. Daniel hadn't asked me to come back to the bedroom, and I hadn't offered. We existed in the same house like strangers who shared a past but no longer shared a future. Every morning, he left without a word. Every evening, he returned with silence clinging to him like a shadow. Margaret called daily now, not to ask how I was, to instruct. Daniel needs space. Don't stress him. This phase will pass if you behave wisely. Behave like a child, like a problem to be managed. That Thursday, Daniel came home earlier than usual. He didn't take off his jacket. He didn't sit down. He stood in the doorway, his jaw tight, his eyes distant. "My parents are coming over," he said. "We need to talk." Something in his voice made my stomach drop. They arrived together, Margaret, Daniel's father, and one of his sisters. No smiles, no pleasantries. They sat across from me like a panel, Daniel beside them, not beside me. Margaret spoke first. "This situation has gone on long enough." I waited for Daniel to say something. He didn't. She continued, calmly, confidently, as if discussing house repairs. "Daniel is unhappy. The family is concerned. This marriage is causing unnecessary stress." I felt my heartbeat in my ears. "So?" I asked softly. "So," she said, folding her hands, "we believe it would be best if you took some time away. Go to your parents, think about your behavior, let Daniel breathe." Time away, exile. I looked at Daniel. "Is this what you want?" He hesitated, just long enough to hurt. "I think it might help," he said. That was the moment. The moment I realized they didn't want compromise, they didn't want healing, they didn't want understanding. They wanted me gone long enough to erase me. I stood up slowly. My legs felt weak, but my voice didn't. "This is my home," I said. "I won't be pushed out like I don't matter." Margaret's eyes hardened. "Jane," she said, "don't make this harder than it needs to be." Harder for whom? They left shortly after, confident, satisfied. Daniel didn't follow me when I retreated to the bathroom. I locked the door and slid down against it, shaking. For the first time, I understood the depth of the nightmare. This wasn't just emotional neglect. This was coordinated, planned. That night, Daniel didn't sleep in the house. He texted once. "Staying at my parents', we'll talk later." I stared at my phone until the screen went dark. I didn't cry. Instead, something inside me shifted. I started remembering who I was before I became quiet, before I became small, before I believed their version of me. The next morning, I called my father. I hadn't spoken honestly to him in months. When he heard my voice, he didn't interrupt. He didn't offer solutions. He just listened as I finally told the truth. When I finished, there was silence. Then he said, "Jane, come home if you need to, but don't let anyone convince you that you deserve this." That sentence felt like oxygen. Daniel returned 2 days later, acting as if nothing had happened. He avoided eye contact, avoided conversation, avoided responsibility. I asked him directly, "Do you want this marriage?" He said, "I want peace." That was his answer. Not love, not partnership, peace at my expense. I began noticing things I had ignored before. Documents missing from the drawer. Conversations stopping when I entered a room. Margaret texting Daniel late at night, messages he never showed me. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived from a lawyer. I sat at the kitchen table, hands trembling, reading words that blurred together. Separation, temporary arrangements, living conditions. I wasn't supposed to see it yet. Margaret had moved faster than I realized. When Daniel came home, I held the letter up. "Were you going to tell me?" He looked caught, but only for a second. "My parents think it's best," he said. "Your parents, always your parents." That night, I packed a small bag, not to leave, but to feel prepared. I started documenting everything. Messages, dates, conversations. I learned the quiet strength of gathering truth while everyone else assumed I was too weak to fight. Margaret noticed the change. "You seem distant," she said during one visit. "That's not good for a marriage," I smiled, the same way she smiled at my wedding. Cold, controlled, careful. Inside, I was no longer afraid of her, because fear feeds control and I was done feeding them. The final blow came when Daniel tried to gaslight me into believing all of this was my fault. "You've always been unstable," he said one night. "My family tried to help you." Help me? By isolating me? By silencing me? By deciding my fate without my consent? I looked at him and felt something close to grief. Not for the marriage, for the man I thought he was. That night, lying alone on the couch, I realized the truth I had avoided since the beginning. They didn't just want me quiet. They wanted me broken enough to leave without a fight. And I knew then, deep in my bones, that the next step would be uglier. Because people who smile while hurting you don't stop until they win, unless you stand up. There is a strange calm that comes just before a storm ends. Not the calm of peace, but the calm of certainty. By the time the final chapter of my marriage began, I was no longer confused. I was no longer begging to be understood. I was no longer hoping someone would suddenly wake up and choose me. I was awake. And once you truly wake up, everything changes. Daniel and I barely spoke anymore. Our conversations were transactional, about bills, schedules, silence. The house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a waiting room where everyone else had already decided my future, and I was expected to sit quietly until my name was called. Margaret stopped pretending altogether. She spoke to me like someone who had already won. "You should start thinking practically," she said one afternoon, sitting at my kitchen table like she owned it. "Women your age need stability. Dragging this out won't help anyone. Women your age." I looked at her and realized something powerful. She was afraid. Not of me staying, but of me leaving on my own terms. That was the moment I stopped explaining myself. I met with a lawyer the following week. Alone, calm, prepared, I walked into that office carrying months of documentation, screenshots, notes, timelines, my truth neatly organized after being dismissed for so long. The lawyer listened carefully, then said, "Jane, you've been emotionally abused and financially manipulated." Hearing those words out loud was painful. But it was also validating. For the first time, someone named what I had been surviving. When Daniel was served with papers, he was shocked, not angry, not relieved, shocked. People like him never expect resistance. They expect compliance. "You blindsided me," he said that night. I almost laughed. "You planned my exit without telling me," I replied calmly. "I just chose not to disappear quietly." Margaret called immediately. Her voice was no longer sweet, no longer controlled. "This is unnecessary," she snapped. "You're embarrassing the family." There it was, not concern, not regret, reputation. I hung up without responding. That night I slept better than I had in months. The days that followed were heavy, but clear. Daniel tried to rewrite history. He said he had always tried, that his family only wanted the best, that I was exaggerating. I didn't argue. I didn't defend. I didn't explain. I had learned something crucial. You don't convince people who benefit from misunderstanding you. I moved out quietly. No dramatic exit. No shouting match. Just boxes, memories, and the sound of a door closing behind me. As I drove away, I felt grief, but not regret. Grief for the woman who smiled at her wedding, believing love was enough. Grief for the version of me who stayed silent too long, but also pride, because I survived something that tried to erase me. In the weeks after the separation, people started reaching out, friends I had lost touch with, relatives who had sensed something was wrong. They told me things I hadn't known. Margaret had controlled other women in the family too. Daniel had never stood up for anyone. The smiles had always been masks. I wasn't the problem. I was just the one who refused to stay broken. Healing didn't come all at once. Some nights, I cried for no clear reason. Some mornings, I woke up expecting to feel afraid again. But slowly, something beautiful happened. I started recognizing myself. I laughed louder. I spoke freely. I took up space again. I learned that love doesn't demand silence. That marriage isn't endurance. That family doesn't feel like fear. And I learned this most important truth of all. Sometimes the people who smile the brightest at your wedding are the ones who will try the hardest to destroy your marriage, not because you failed, but because you refused to belong to them. If you're listening to this story and you recognize yourself in my silence, my confusion, my fear, please hear me. You are not weak. You are not broken. And you are not imagining it. Walking away doesn't mean you failed. Sometimes, walking away means you finally chose yourself. This was my nightmare, and this, finally, was my freedom.